I've got a few things to do around my world, so I grabbed some horror stories to go through. The first one reads, my wife has been peeking at me from around corners and behind furniture. It's gone from weird to terrifying. My wife Lynn and I have been together for 6 years and married for 11 months. She isn't into anything creepy and has never been into pranks. It's just not her cup of tea, and that's fine, but that's what was so strange about this. It's just so unlike her. 2 months ago, I was in the kitchen making myself some coffee before work. I took a sip of coffee as I hurried down the hall towards the front door, when I had happened to notice Lynn peeking at me from around the corner ahead of me. Oh no, what the hell? I could only see her eyes, and a strand of her long dark hair hanging against the wall. The rest of her body was concealed behind the corner. I nearly spilled my coffee when I saw her. Geez, Lynn, I said, wiping a few drops of coffee from my pants. You scared the shit out of me. She immediately popped out of view like a little kid that had been caught. I heard her scurry off towards the living room, and by the time I got to the front door, she was out of sight. I would not be able to deal with that if that was my wife. Oh my days, that is horrifying. It was really weird and just totally out of character for her, like I said. But I also found it kind of funny that she was being more playful and a little less serious. I shouted that I loved her and called her a weirdo. As I shut the door behind me, I heard her laughing. I forgot about it by lunch, and by the time I got home, she was her normal self. I didn't bring it up, and neither did she, and life went on. The next incident happened 3 days later. It was around 2 a.m. and I had woken up to get a drink. I was standing at the kitchen island, jug of OJ in hand, when I felt a strong feeling that I was being watched. From whatever reason, I looked down at the floor and saw my wife's smiling face staring back. She was peeking at me from the other side of the island, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes and grinning like the Cheshire Cat. I screamed, I'll admit it. Not out of irritation, but fear. For some reason at that moment, I was scared. At the sound of my scream, Lynn scuttled backwards out of my view, her hands and feet smacking the tile floor as she hurried out of the kitchen on all fours. I just stood there, frozen in shock. It took me a little longer than I'd like to admit to go back upstairs, but I eventually did. When I got to our bedroom, Lynn was lying on her side, asleep. Or at least pretending to be. I stood there for a while, watching her breathing to be sure she was really asleep. I had the feeling she might jump out at me at the moment I got into bed. But she didn't. I climbed into bed and she didn't even move. Her breathing was soft and deep, and I was starting to wonder if I'd dreamt the whole thing. The next morning I waited for her to come down for coffee, and after handing her a mug and kissing her cheek, I decided to ask her about it. What was that about last night? She frowned over her cup of coffee, shaking her head like she had no clue what I was referring to. You peeking at me again? From over there, I said, pointing to the spot on the floor by the kitchen island. She followed my gaze, and when she looked back at me, she burst out laughing. She laughed so hard that I couldn't help but join her. You creep the fuck out of me sometimes, you know that? I said. She giggled and set her cup on the counter and wrapped her arms around my neck. You creep me out all the time, so I guess we're even, she teased. So does she even remember what she's doing, or like, is she sleepwalking? I'm so confused. We said our goodbyes and left for work. As I drove, I kept thinking about how creepy it had been seeing her grinning at me from behind the island like that. The sounds her hands made on the floor as she crawled away. I told myself she was just trying to be silly, just trying to join me in my love of all things horror. It's not like I was afraid of her, but it still didn't sit right with me. I started seeing her peeking at me more and more. I didn't understand why she was doing it, but it clearly made her happy. I just hoped she would tire out of the game quickly. Lynn didn't peek at me for the next 2 weeks. I started to think she was done with her weird prank and I was relieved. We were watching a show on Netflix one night and I jokingly said that I hadn't seen her peeking at me lately. She looked at me with a small smile and said, maybe I've just gotten better at it. I didn't say anything, but I wondered whether or not she was joking. That is so freaky. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Was she still peeking at me when I wasn't looking and I just hadn't noticed? I started to feel paranoid, constantly checking whether she was watching me from around the corner or behind a door. I was jumpy whenever I was home and she wasn't in full view of me. I felt stupid and a little crazy. But after a few weeks without another incident, I began to relax. I stopped checking behind furniture and walls and told myself it was just a bad memory. Then a few days ago, things got so much worse. Lynn left to go to a friend's and I lounged on the couch and played a couple games on my laptop. Around 9 p.m. I hopped in the shower, and as I was washing the soap from my hair, I felt that awful feeling that I was being watched. I slowly opened my eyes and almost had a fucking heart attack. Lynn was peeking from me behind the shower curtain. Her long, dark hair hung against the curtain, the ends dripping with water. Her mouth hung open in a terrible grin, eyes wide and red. I screamed and jumped back against the wall. Her makeup ran down her cheeks in 2 black streaks. I was fucking terrified. Finally, after what felt like forever, she slowly pulled her head back out of the shower. A second later, the bathroom door slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the mirror. I screamed again, and jumped out of the shower to lock the door. I stayed inside the bathroom for over an hour. Suddenly, I heard a muffled sound, and I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, straining to listen. I couldn't hear anything, but I envisioned Lynn standing on the other side of the door, giggling at her joke. "What the fuck, Lynn?" I snapped. This shit is getting really annoying. Instead, I heard a faint moan, and then complete silence. "Lynn?" I called out, too afraid to open the damn door and face my own wife. I waited another 30 minutes or so. Finally, I decided I wasn't going to spend the night hiding in my bathroom, so I got down on my knees and peered under the door. I almost expected to see her face peeking back at me, but thankfully I didn't. I could see straight down the hallway to the top of the stairs, but no Lynn, waiting to see her head pop up from the top of the step. But it never came. I stood up, my hand hovering over the door. I slowly turned the lock and was about to yank it open when I heard a sound that still makes me feel nauseous when I think about it. A moan, louder than before, but this time I was able to tell just where it was coming from. I turned my head to the closet door and locked eyes with my wife, who was peeking out at me from the slight gap. Why does his wife keep doing that? What my days? I would spend the night at a friend's house. I would not stand for this. Her eyes were still wide as ever, and her mouth was hanging open in the most grotesque, gaping smile I'd ever seen. Her hands were clasped to her chest, body trembling with sheer delight, as if she could barely contain her excitement. A short, raspy moan bubbled up from her throat, deep and raw, sending a shiver through my entire body. Somehow I found the ability to pull the bathroom door open and ran as fast as I could, all the way down the steps, snagging my keys and phone from the table in the living room before running outside to my car. I could hear her shrill laughter behind me, but I didn't hear her getting closer. I didn't bother shutting the front door. I drove away from the house faster than I legally should have, shivering the entire time. I was still in my boxers and my hair was damp. I drove straight to my brother Chris's house, about 40 minutes away. Knowing she'd been in there with me the entire time made my skin crawl. She'd never left the fucking bathroom at all. Instead, she slipped inside the closet and slammed the bathroom door shut to fool me. I woke up just as the sun started to rise. I was contemplating calling her when that familiar feeling came over me. I was being watched. My eyes drifted away from the ceiling almost on their own. Her face pressed up against the window beside the couch, staring down at me with the same gaping smile. Drool dribbled down her lips, leaving 2 long streaks down the glass. I jumped up from the couch and pounded my palms against the glass. "Lynn, are you crazy? What the hell is wrong with you? Just go home!" I shouted. "Now!" She didn't move, and her ghastly expression never changed. I could hear Chris and his wife moving around upstairs, as if Lynn could hear them from a place outside. Her head twitched slightly in their direction as she began to close her mouth slowly. Chris called my name from upstairs. I turned to see him and his wife Rebecca hurrying down the steps. When I turned back to the window, Lynn was gone. The only sign she'd been there at all was the 2 streaks of drool still dripping down the glass. I tried explaining to Chris and Rebecca about waking up to see Lynn watching me through their window. Chris and I went outside to the spot in front of the window, but there were no footprints in the dirt, just a slight indent. Animal, probably, Chris guessed, and I didn't argue. Lynn had called me 4 times and sent a flurry of texts. "Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm really worried. Can you answer? Just come home." I ended up staying with Chris and Rebecca for another night. "Wait, what do you mean? You saw her? You saw Lynn?" I asked. "She stopped by this morning just after Chris left for work." "Beck, what did she say?" Did she come inside?" I asked. "No, she just asked if you were awake yet, and I said that you weren't." So I did what any husband in my position would do. I called her mother. "Yes?" she answered. "Marianne, it's me, Ben. Do you have a minute to talk? It's about Lynn. She's been acting strangely. I wanted to know if you'd ever noticed any odd behavior, or possibly any mental health issues?" I asked. "I'm not sure if this is one of your jokes, Benjamin, but if so, I don't find the humor in it." "Marianne, it's not a joke. I'm sincerely concerned about Lynn's mental health. Her behavior has been very erratic lately, and I'm very worried about her. And I figured as her mother you would be as well. If you're truly concerned, then I suggest you get the health professionals involved. Please, if not for me, do it for Lynn," I tried. "My only advice would be to seek professional help. Do not call here again. Goodbye." After a while, I almost gave up, until I remembered her last words to me. Seek professional help. She'd said those words with a bit of urgency. I could have just been grasping at straws, but no. I was sure her voice had changed ever so slightly when she said that. as if they were very important. They were all obviously shocked, but thankfully they believed me. Chris didn't think we should involve the police just yet. He offered instead to go with me, and I readily accepted. At least I wouldn't be going into that house alone. We drove over this morning, just after breakfast. When we pulled into the driveway, my stomach began doing somersaults. Her car wasn't there, but I still didn't let my guard down. The front door was ajar, and for a split second, I thought we'd see her eyes staring through the gap. I was shaking and starting to sweat. Chris, however, was fine. I pushed the door open and immediately was hit with the stench of rot, my eyes darting around for any signs of Lynn. The house was deadly quiet and dark, despite being 10 in the morning. "Let's just go upstairs," I whispered. On the way up, my shoes crunched over pieces of glass that looked to be littered over a few of the steps. We climbed the rest of the steps and checked the spare bedroom, but it looked completely untouched. I was hesitant to go into the bathroom, my fear from that night coming back to me all at once. Chris noticed and offered to go in by himself, but I couldn't let him do that. So we walked in together, checking the closet and the shower. The bathroom looked as if it hadn't been touched since the night I left. "I don't think she's here, Ben. Why don't you pack some clothes and we'll try coming back tomorrow or something?" I nodded and went into our bedroom and shoved some clothes into a duffel bag. When I checked inside our closet, I came across the source of the smell and gagged. Chris took one look and lost all colour in his face. He had to go stand by the stairs to get away from the sight and smell. I gazed down in shock at what lay inside my bedroom closet. Soaking into the rug were at least a dozen eyeballs, all carefully laid out in pairs. Some were as large as a quarter, while others were as tiny as a marble. I stared down at the eyes she'd collected from small animals and wondered how she'd gotten them. "Ben, I think we should go," he called from the hall. "I'm getting nauseous." Alright, I grabbed my duffel and shut the closet door on my new nightmare. I stepped out into the hall and took a deep breath of air. "You coming or what? I can't stand the smell any." His words died in his throat, and eyes grew wide with fear. I didn't ask why. I could feel it. Someone was watching me. I turned around, my eyes slowly scanning the bedroom. "Christ," I whispered, as I finally saw what we'd missed. Under the bed, curled on her side, watching us with the excitement of a kid on Christmas morning, was my wife. She'd held her hands together just under her chin, and they were shaking eagerly. Now that she had been found, I could hear the quiet noises she was making, a sort of hiccuping sound in her throat, as if the excitement was just too much for her. It was unnerving to say the least. Wide eyes, and that same huge smile. Everything in me told me to run, but I forced it away. This was my wife. No matter how twisted, she was still the woman I married. I had to help her. "Lynn?" I said softly. She didn't respond, but her head bobbed back and forth in two quick little movements. "Baby, I just want to help, okay? Can you let me do that?" I asked. She let a tiny moan escape her wide open mouth, and I had to resist the urge to run. Her shoulders were starting to quiver, and her eyes grew as large as saucers. I crouched down so I could see her better, and immediately saw the blood. Her hands were covered in it. They trembled more the closer I got. "Lynn, are you hurt? You're bleeding," I said. She bobbed her head again, her bloody fingers moving up and down as if she was playing an invisible piano. They occasionally grazed her chin, leaving smears of blood on her skin. Her hand sprang out towards me. A sharp pain shot through my arm, and I fell back on my ass. My arm burned, and I could see the blood dripping down onto the carpet. I looked back at her in shock and saw her grinning madly, her fingers clutching a large shard of glass. "You alright in there?" Chris asked from behind me. When I turned back to face Lynn, I saw that her focus was shifted. She wasn't looking at me anymore, and she wasn't smiling anymore either. She was staring past me, her eyes glaring at Chris the way a hungry lion might stare at an antelope. Her mouth was still hanging open, but it twisted into a snarl. I got to my feet and began walking backwards down the hall, afraid to take my eyes off her. "Are you bleeding?" Chris asked. The moment the words left his mouth, Lynn started fast scooting out from under the bed, the glass shard still in her fist. "Chris, run! Go!" I yelled. Lynn had crawled completely out from under the bed and stood in the bedroom doorway, her face twisted in rage. Her whole body was visibly tense. Blood ran down her fingers and onto the floor. "Move your ass, Chris," I said as quietly but firmly as I could. Lynn bobbed her head back in fast, sharp motions and began to grin, stretching her mouth open wider and wider, so that her chin seemed to touch her chest. I stood at the top of the steps, stuck between the love for a woman who clearly needed serious help and self-preservation. Her eyes focused on me once again as she slowly lifted the glass, holding it out in front of her, and then she started sprinting towards me, grinning with utter excitement. Thankfully, my body took over and I flew down the stairs, skipping 2 or 3 at a time. I made it to the front door before I felt her leap onto my back, wrapping her arms around my neck. Her open mouth next to my ear so that I could hear those terrible hiccuping sounds up close. I shook her off of me, knocking her to the floor. I felt a searing pain in my back as she went, but I tore open the front door and bolted to my car. Chris was standing in the front yard, talking on the phone with the police. I didn't say a word. I just ran to my car and jumped in. Chris took the hint and followed me, still on the line with 911. I watched the rearview mirror, sure I'd see her there, running after us, but I never did. I went straight to the ER and I got 11 stitches in my arm and 3 on my back. They advised me to stay with a friend or relative for a while and to file a restraining order as soon as I could. I dropped Chris off at home and went to a motel an hour away. I wanted to put as much distance between me and Lynn as I could. This is where I've been for the last 4 hours. I thought maybe the police would find her. Maybe they'd get her the help she desperately needs. But now I don't think so. Because 40 minutes I got a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. I found you. And a picture attached. The picture was dark and grainy, but I instantly knew what it was. There was no mistaking my wife's eye. I started typing this out immediately after. I don't know what to do. I'm alone and scared. But I can't help but feel that I'm being watched. Yeah, that one was kind of messed up. I'll probably read more of these. Alright, bye.